Cowboy saved Apache from desert raiders, and the figure returning at sunset carried his fate. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Jack Monroe had always preferred the quiet solitude of the open plains. A cowboy by trade and a loner by choice, Jack had found peace in the vast expanse of the desert, far from the bustling towns and ever-watchful eyes of society. His only companions were the cattle he tended to, and the occasional bird that flew overhead. But on this particular day, as the sun began to dip low on the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the landscape, Jack's life was about to change. He had been working his land, the steady rhythm of his axe striking the wood, when a faint sound reached his ears. At first, it was nothing more than a whisper in the wind, but then it grew louder, more desperate. Jack stopped, the axe frozen mid-swing, as he strained to listen. There, on the edge of the clearing, two figures appeared. They were small, almost childlike, with dirt-covered faces and torn clothing, but it was the way they moved that caught Jack's attention. The figures were native children, twins by the look of them, no older than 8. They stood still for a moment, as if unsure whether to approach, their wide, brown eyes staring directly at him. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had heard of the raiders, the desert outlaws who preyed on the weak and helpless, but he had never encountered them so close to home. The children, despite their fear, seemed to recognize him, their eyes filled with something that was hard to describe. It was as if they had been searching for him specifically. The girl stepped forward, holding something in her hand. A small leather pouch, tightly gripped by both children, the scent of something strange wafting from it. Jack took a step closer, lowering his axe, his curiosity piqued. "We know what you did to our father," the girl said, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the silence like a knife. Jack's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing. What did she mean? What had he done? The boy, who had remained silent until now, spoke next. "The man with the scar," he said, his voice trembling. "The one you held underwater." Jack's hand instinctively went to the scar that ran down his neck, a faint reminder of a past he had buried long ago. The memory, once distant, now rushed back to him with full force. It was a night like any other, a confrontation in a creek, a desperate struggle that had ended with a man's life. Jack had always told himself it was self-defense, that it had been necessary, but now, as he faced these children, he wasn't so sure. "I did what I had to do," Jack said, his voice rough. "Your father was a threat." The girl's eyes softened, as if she understood. "You think it was justice," she said quietly. "But it wasn't." The boy nodded, his face serious. "We need you to do it again," he added. Jack's mind spun as the weight of their words settled in. What did they mean? What was he being asked to do? Before he could respond, the sound of hooves echoed in the distance, drawing closer. The children quickly vanished into the shadows, leaving Jack standing alone in the clearing, the mysterious pouch still lingering in his mind. A rider emerged from the trees, his silhouette framed by the fading light of the setting sun. Jack's hand tightened around the handle of his axe, ready for whatever came next. He didn't know it yet, but this encounter with the children and the mysterious pouch was only the beginning of a fate that would change his life forever. As the rider drew closer, Jack could see him more clearly, a tall man, his face obscured by the shadows of his wide-brimmed hat. His horse, a sturdy bay, trotted slowly as if accustomed to the heavy weight of the world. The rider's gaze met Jack's, a steady look that seemed to weigh him, to measure his very soul. Jack's grip tightened on the axe handle, his instincts screaming that something was off, but his mind couldn't yet grasp the full picture. The man pulled his horse to a halt, his boots thudding softly against the ground as he dismounted with practiced ease. "You're Jack Monroe, aren't you?" The rider's voice was low, but there was a certain authority to it that made Jack stand a little taller. That's right, Jack replied cautiously, his gaze scanning the area for any sign of trouble. The rider nodded, as though he had expected the answer. I'm Caleb Thornfield, he said, his voice carrying a weight of experience, as if he had seen far too many things in his time. I've heard of you. Jack's brow furrowed slightly. What brings you out here, Thornfield? This part of the desert doesn't see many visitors. Caleb's lips twisted into something resembling a half-smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. I've come looking for something, or rather someone. A couple of native children. Twins. Jack felt a chill run down his spine, and his hand instinctively moved to the scar on his neck, the same one the children had mentioned. I haven't seen any children, Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady, though he could feel the tension rising. Caleb studied him for a long moment, his eyes searching Jack's face as if trying to read him. Finally, he spoke again, his tone more serious. I know they came this way. I've been tracking them for days. And I know you've seen them. They've left a trail straight to your door. Jack didn't reply at first, his mind racing. The children, those twins, had left something with him, something that he didn't fully understand. The pouch. The words they had spoken. You're lying, Jack said finally, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. He had seen them, and he had helped them. But what they wanted, and why they had come to him, was still a mystery. Caleb's expression remained unreadable, but there was a hardness in his eyes now. You can deny it all you want, Monroe. But I'll find them. And I'll find whatever it is they're hiding. You can either help me, or you can get out of my way. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He had lived his life out here, far from the troubles of the world, but this? This was something different. This wasn't just about cattle or land. This was about something far deeper, something he wasn't prepared for. Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I'm not looking for trouble, he said slowly. But if you think I'll just stand aside while you go after those kids, you've got another thing coming. Caleb's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, as if listening for something in the distance. Jack followed his gaze, and that's when he heard it. Hooves, galloping fast, coming closer. We need to move, Caleb said, his voice low and urgent. They'll be here soon. And if you're smart, you'll come with me. Jack hesitated, the weight of his decision pressing on him like the desert heat. He wasn't sure what Caleb Thornfield was after, but he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't going to end quietly. With a final glance at the clearing, Jack turned toward his cabin, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. All right, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside. Let's go. But know this, Thornfield, whatever happens, I'm not letting those kids fall into your hands. Caleb said nothing, only nodded once before mounting his horse and spurring it forward. Jack followed, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he was stepping into something far bigger than he ever anticipated. The twins had come to him for a reason. And now, whether he liked it or not, he was involved in a story that had yet to reveal its true nature. As Jack and Caleb rode through the fading light of the desert, the sound of hooves echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. The air was thick with tension, the horizon stretching out in front of them like a never-ending sea of dust. Caleb rode ahead, his posture straight, his eyes scanning the land as if he could sense the danger approaching before it even reached them. Jack kept a steady pace behind him, his thoughts racing. What was it about these children, these twins, that made them so important? And why had they come to him, of all people? Jack had always been a man of simple needs: his ranch, his cattle, and his solitude. But now, his world had been turned upside down, and he was caught in a web of mystery and danger that he couldn't yet untangle. They passed the outskirts of Jack's land, heading toward the hills that rose in the distance. The sun was dipping lower now, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Jack could feel the weight of the evening air settling in, the stillness of the desert broken only by the sound of their horses' hooves. You sure about this? Jack asked, his voice low but steady. Caleb glanced back at him, his expression unreadable. It's the only way, he replied, his voice carrying a note of finality. The children know something. Something valuable. And I'm not about to let that slip through my fingers. Jack frowned but said nothing. The man's determination was clear, but there was something unsettling about the way he spoke. As if he knew more than he was letting on. They rode on in silence, the only sound the soft thud of hooves on the dry earth. The sun had nearly set, casting an orange glow across the land. Jack could see the outlines of rocks and brush in the distance, the hills now just dark silhouettes against the fading light. They stopped for a moment, both men sitting quietly on their horses, listening to the quiet that had settled over the desert. Jack could feel the weight of his decision pressing on him, but there was no turning back now. He had promised to help, and he would see it through. The sudden cry of a bird startled both of them, breaking the silence. Caleb's hand instinctively went to his side, where his gun was holstered, but he relaxed when he saw nothing out of the ordinary. Jack's eyes scanned the horizon, his heart beating faster now. Something was wrong. He couldn't quite place it, but he had a feeling they weren't alone. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he listened to the wind shifting, carrying with it the faint sound of voices, low, urgent voices, carried on the breeze. Caleb didn't seem to notice, his attention fixed ahead, but Jack's instincts were telling him that they were not the only ones out here. We're getting close, Caleb said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Jack nodded but remained silent, his senses still on edge. The terrain was starting to change, the land rising up in rocky outcrops, the path narrowing as they entered a canyon-like pass. The voices in the distance grew louder, and Jack's heart skipped a beat as he realized that the voices weren't coming from a single direction. They were surrounding them. We're being watched, Jack murmured, his eyes scanning the shadows, looking for any movement. Caleb stopped his horse abruptly, his eyes narrowing as he glanced around. Get ready, he said, his tone now serious. We've got company. Jack's hand moved instinctively to his rifle, his pulse quickening as the sounds of movement grew closer. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, their forms outlined by the last light of the setting sun. Jack could see the distinct shape of warriors, their faces painted and their bodies cloaked in the traditional garb of the Apache. There were more of them than he had expected, at least a dozen, maybe more, standing silently, waiting. Jack's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't make a move. Instead, he looked to Caleb, his expression unreadable. This is it, isn't it? Jack said quietly, his voice heavy with realization. Caleb didn't answer at first. He simply nodded, his eyes scanning the warriors before him. This is their land, he said. And they're here to settle old scores. Jack's stomach twisted at the thought, but he remained still, his mind racing. Whatever had brought him to this point, there was no turning back now. The children, these twins, had led him here, and now it was time to face whatever was waiting for them. The warriors moved slowly, almost methodically, their eyes fixed on Caleb and Jack. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of the wind rustling through the brush. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that the fate of the twins, and perhaps his own fate as well, rested in the balance. And as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving only the darkening sky above, Jack knew that he had made his choice. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. The Apache warriors were here, and there was no escaping the consequences of his actions. The journey he had started was far from over, and the figure returning at sunset had, indeed, carried his fate. The Apache warriors stood in a circle around Jack and Caleb, their eyes unwavering, the tension in the air thick as smoke. The faintest hint of a breeze stirred the dust beneath their feet, but aside from that, there was an eerie stillness. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his hand steady on his rifle, knowing this moment could change everything. Caleb sat upright in his saddle, his posture as unyielding as the rock formations around them. He seemed unfazed, his eyes scanning the group of warriors before him. There were no words exchanged yet, only the intense stares of the Apache. Jack could feel the weight of their gaze, as if they were reading him, calculating his every move. The leader of the Apache stepped forward, his face painted in intricate symbols that seemed to carry the weight of generations. His eyes locked onto Caleb's, and for a brief moment, Jack felt like an outsider in a story that wasn't his own. The man spoke, his voice deep, carrying an authority that resonated through the land. "You bring a stranger to our land," he said, his words directed at Caleb, but Jack could feel them like an accusation. Caleb didn't flinch, his gaze never wavering. "I bring no harm," he replied, his voice calm, but Jack could sense the hidden edge beneath it. "I have come to help." The Apache leader studied Caleb for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Jack. There was a pause, and for a second, Jack felt like he might be dismissed, like he didn't belong here. But then the leader spoke again, his words softer this time, almost to himself. "You saved one of ours," he said, the weight of the statement hanging in the air like a heavy stone. Jack tensed, unsure of what the leader meant. The twins. They had come to him for help, but what did they want now? "And for that, you will face the consequences," the leader continued, his tone unreadable. Caleb shifted slightly in his saddle, but Jack could tell he was still holding his ground. "We seek no trouble. We are only here to ensure the children's safety." The leader's lips twitched into a slight smile, but there was no humor in it. "Safety?" he repeated, almost as if testing the word. "Safety is not given. It is earned." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't sure if he was part of this conversation, or if he was simply a witness to something much larger. The leader glanced at the other warriors, who had remained silent, their faces unreadable. "You are not welcome here," the leader said, his gaze now focused solely on Jack. "Yet you are here. You will leave. With us." Jack's stomach dropped. This was it. The moment that would determine everything. He had saved the children, but what did they really want from him? "I won't go," Jack said firmly, his voice steady despite the rising fear within him. "I won't leave." The leader's eyes narrowed, his face hardening. "Then you will learn what it means to be truly tested," he said. "You will see what our people are capable of. And you will learn what you owe." Jack swallowed hard. This wasn't just about the children anymore. This was about something much bigger, something he couldn't yet fully understand. The warriors closed in slightly, their movements measured and deliberate. Jack remained still, every muscle in his body tense, ready for whatever came next. Caleb turned his horse slowly, as if the whole encounter was nothing more than a slight inconvenience. "I warned you," he said quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "But you insisted on helping." Jack's eyes met Caleb's, and in that moment, he realized the full weight of his decision. He wasn't just helping the children. He was stepping into a world he had no business being a part of. And now, the consequences would come crashing down on him. The leader of the Apache raised his hand, signaling for the warriors to step back. "We will give you one chance," he said. "A chance to prove your worth." Jack's heart pounded in his chest, the tension in the air palpable. He knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: his fate, and the fate of those he had helped, hung in the balance. The leader of the Apache raised his hand, signaling for the warriors to step back, his eyes still locked on Jack. The air between them was thick with tension, the faint sound of the wind the only thing that broke the silence. Jack's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he knew one thing for certain: the path he had chosen had no easy return. Caleb was still sitting calmly in his saddle, his face a mask of impassivity, as if nothing in the world could faze him. Jack, however, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, as if every second was a choice between life and death. The leader spoke again, his voice steady but filled with authority. "You've chosen your path, and now you must walk it," he said, his gaze flicking briefly to the warriors behind him. "You have one chance to prove your worth, to prove that you are worthy of the life you seek to lead." Jack felt a chill run through him, but he kept his expression firm, not letting his uncertainty show. The children had come to him, and now their fate, along with his, hung in the balance. There was no turning back. The Apache leader stepped forward, his tall frame moving with a quiet strength that Jack found both intimidating and mesmerizing. He was a man who carried centuries of history in his bones, someone whose very presence commanded respect. "You will spend the night with us," the leader continued, "and in the morning, we will see if you are truly a man of honor, or if you are nothing more than a passing wanderer, unworthy of our trust." Jack's thoughts spun, his mind unable to fully comprehend what he had just heard. Spend the night? What did that mean? Was this some kind of test, a ritual he had to endure? Before he could ask, the leader turned, motioning for the warriors to begin preparing a camp. The sounds of their movements were quiet but purposeful, and Jack knew that they were preparing for something he wasn't yet fully aware of. He looked over at Caleb, hoping for some kind of explanation, but the man remained silent, his gaze fixed on the Apache leader. Jack's eyes followed the leader as he moved toward the gathering of warriors. The sun had nearly set now, the light fading into a deep purple that colored the sky and shadows. As the campfires were lit and the smoke rose into the air, Jack was left alone with his thoughts. He glanced at Caleb once more, but the man didn't seem to notice, lost in his own contemplation. Jack felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation, unsure of what would come next but knowing that whatever it was, it would be a turning point in his life. As the night wore on, the firelight flickered and danced, casting long shadows over the desert landscape. The warriors sat in a circle around the flames, their faces stoic, their eyes watching Jack as he stood at the edge of the camp. He was an outsider here, a stranger in a land that didn't belong to him. And yet, somehow, he had been drawn into the heart of this world of Apache warriors and ancient traditions. The leader's voice broke the silence again, this time softer, but still commanding. "You saved one of us," he said, his eyes meeting Jack's. "But in the morning, you will face the test. Do not expect kindness from us, for kindness is something earned." Jack swallowed hard, the weight of the words sinking deep into his chest. He had saved the children, but what did that truly mean? Would it be enough to earn their trust, or would he be left to face whatever test awaited him in the morning? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he knew there was no escape. He had made his choice, and now he would have to live with the consequences. As the firelight flickered and the warriors settled into their positions around the camp, Jack felt a sense of inevitability settle over him. Whatever this test was, it would be his to face. And in the morning, he would find out if he was truly worthy of the life he had chosen. The stars above seemed to whisper secrets to him, their light casting an ethereal glow over the desert below. Jack closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing, preparing himself for whatever the dawn would bring. The night stretched on, each moment a reminder that his fate was no longer his own, but tied to the lives of those around him. The test was coming, and he had no choice but to face it head-on. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Jack Monroe found himself standing at the edge of the Apache camp, his boots sinking into the soft earth beneath him. The night had passed slowly, and though he had tried to rest, his mind had been a whirlwind of thoughts and questions. What would the test be? And would it be something he could endure? The air was cooler now, the chill of the desert night giving way to the warmth of the sun's first rays. He glanced around the camp, the fire from the night before now nothing more than smoldering embers, and the Apache warriors beginning to stir from their places around the camp. The leader, whose name Jack still didn't know, stood near the fire, his tall frame silhouetted against the rising sun. He appeared calm, almost serene, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. Jack's heart began to race again. This was it. Whatever awaited him now would determine everything, his place in this world and his future with the Apache people. The leader turned his gaze toward Jack, his eyes unreadable. Without a word he motioned for Jack to follow, his movements purposeful and deliberate. Jack hesitated for a moment, glancing toward Caleb, but the man remained silent, his face impassive as ever. Jack had no choice but to follow. They walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the dry earth. As they reached the far side of the camp, the leader stopped and turned to face Jack. His gaze was intense, but there was no malice in it, only a quiet determination. "You have helped one of us," the leader said finally, his voice steady. "But now you must prove that you understand what it means to be part of us. To be truly worthy of our trust." Jack nodded, though his stomach was in knots. The weight of the words hung heavily in the air, and he felt the full responsibility of what was being asked of him. "What must I do?" Jack asked, his voice steady despite the nervous tension building inside him. The leader paused, as if contemplating Jack's worth. Then, with a small gesture, he pointed toward the vast expanse of the desert that stretched out before them. "Walk. Find your way through the desert. You will have nothing. No food, no water. Only the sun and the earth to guide you. If you return before the sun sets, you will have proven yourself. If not, you will not return at all." Jack blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "You want me to walk through the desert, with nothing?" The leader nodded. "It is the way of our people. To survive on your own strength, your knowledge of the land, and your connection to the earth. We live by these rules. And so must you." Jack's mind raced. He had spent his life in the desert, but never like this. Without supplies, without anything to rely on except his own instincts. It was a test like no other, one that seemed impossible but necessary. There was no other choice. He would have to do it. As Jack took a deep breath and began to walk toward the open desert, he could feel the weight of the leader's words on his shoulders. This was no ordinary test. This was a trial of survival, a trial of will, and a trial of the soul. Every step he took felt heavier, the desert stretching out before him like an endless sea of dust and heat. He had no map, no compass. Only the sun to guide him. Jack thought of the children, the twins who had led him here, and wondered if they had known this test awaited him. The wind stirred, carrying with it the scent of the dry earth. Jack could feel the heat building, the harsh rays of the sun beating down on his back, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. This was the moment that would define his place in this world. The desert was unforgiving, but Jack had learned its ways over the years. He had survived it before, and he would survive it again. The first few hours were the hardest, the heat making his throat dry and his body tired. But he pushed forward, using the knowledge of the land that he had gained over the years. He knew where to find shelter from the sun, where to find the rarest of desert plants that could be used for water, and how to keep his bearings by watching the sky. As the hours passed, the heat began to fade, but Jack didn't stop. He knew that the test was not just about survival. It was about perseverance. About proving that he could withstand the harshest of conditions and come out stronger. With each step, he felt more connected to the land, to the earth beneath his feet, and to the Apache people he had come to know. And as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Jack knew that the test was far from over. The day was not yet done. But as he walked on, he could feel the strength of the land flowing through him, and he knew that he would return, not just as a survivor, but as someone who had earned his place in this world. The sun had begun to set as Jack Monroe trudged through the unforgiving desert, his body exhausted and his mind focused on nothing but the endless expanse of sand before him. His throat felt like it was filled with dry cotton, and his skin burned from the harsh rays of the sun that seemed to never relent. Yet, with each step he pressed on, determined to prove himself, to show the Apache that he could survive. The weight of the leader's words echoed in his mind, and he knew that this was more than just a test of endurance. It was a test of everything he had ever believed about himself. With every step, the desert seemed to stretch farther and farther, the landscape a blur of heat and dust. But Jack didn't stop. He had to keep moving. He had no choice. Hours passed, and as the day began to fade, Jack found himself still walking, his steps slow but steady. The sky above had begun to change, shifting from a bright, blinding blue to a deep shade of purple as the sun sank lower behind the distant hills. In the distance, he could see the faint outline of the Apache camp, where the warriors had waited for him the night before. He was almost there, but he didn't feel relief. Instead, a knot tightened in his stomach. He wasn't sure what would happen when he returned, but he knew that he would face whatever came next with everything he had. The desert had tested him in ways he hadn't expected. It had shown him the depths of his own strength, but it had also shown him the fragility of his body, the limits of his endurance. As he neared the camp, he could see the silhouettes of the warriors still gathered around the fire, their figures unmoving as they waited. Jack's heart raced in his chest, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He was close, so close, but the fear of the unknown gripped him tightly. Would they accept him? Would they believe he had earned their trust? As Jack walked toward the camp, the leader stepped forward, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the fading light. The warriors remained silent, their eyes following Jack's every move, but the leader's gaze was unreadable. Jack's steps faltered for just a moment, his body trembling with exhaustion, but he refused to stop. He couldn't. The leader's voice rang out, steady and calm, cutting through the silence of the desert. "You have returned," he said, his tone neither approving nor disapproving. "But did you learn what we intended?" Jack stood tall, his chest heaving with each breath as he nodded. He wasn't sure what the leader meant, but he knew that he had completed the journey. He had survived. "I have," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "I have learned." The leader studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned and motioned for the other warriors to gather around. Jack stood there, his mind racing. What would happen next? He couldn't be sure, but he knew that the Apache would decide his fate now. The leader spoke again, his voice clear and firm. "You have passed the test," he said, his gaze meeting Jack's. "You have proven your worth to us." Jack's heart skipped a beat, and for the first time in what felt like hours, he allowed himself to breathe a little easier. The weight of the desert, the weight of the test, seemed to lift just slightly. But then the leader's gaze softened ever so slightly. "But this is only the beginning," he said. Jack swallowed, unsure of what that meant. "What do you mean?" The leader's eyes flickered to the sky, and for a brief moment, Jack thought he saw a glimmer of something else there, a flicker of approval, of understanding. "The desert does not give its rewards easily," the leader said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "You have proven yourself in one way, but the true test will come when you return to your own world. There, you will face a different kind of challenge." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. What did that mean? What kind of challenge awaited him back in the world he knew? The leader's gaze returned to him, and Jack could see that the man was not finished. "The Apache do not forget," he said, his voice low but firm. "You have our respect, but that does not mean you will be spared the consequences of your choices." Jack nodded, his mind racing, but he understood now. The desert had taught him something deeper than just survival. It had taught him that respect, trust, and honor were not easily earned, and even harder to keep. As the last light of day faded into night, the Apache warriors gathered around Jack, the firelight flickering in their eyes. The challenge had only just begun, and the journey ahead would be far more difficult than he had ever imagined. But Jack Monroe was ready. He had survived the desert. And now, he would face whatever came next, knowing that his fate, like the desert itself, was shaped by both what he had done and what he would choose to do next. The days that followed were a blur of uncertainty for Jack Monroe. The Apache camp had settled into a quiet routine, but Jack could feel the weight of the leader's words lingering in the air, heavy and unspoken. It had been days since the test, days since he had proved himself to the warriors, but something still hung in the balance. He had gained their respect, but respect alone was not enough. The leader had made it clear, the true test awaited him back in the world he had come from. That was the challenge that would define him. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this journey than he understood. He had thought the desert would be the hardest part, but now, as he sat among the Apache warriors, listening to the crackling fire, he realized that the hardest test lay ahead. The leader's words echoed in his mind. "The Apache do not forget." They were not just words of wisdom, they were a warning. Jack had no illusions about what that meant. He had stepped into a world that operated by its own rules, A world where choices had consequences, and where even a single misstep could change everything. As the nights grew colder, Jack spent his time learning from the warriors. He watched them, observed their way of life, and slowly, he began to understand the deeper meaning behind their customs and traditions. He had always believed in the strength of the land, and the resilience of the desert, but now he saw that the Apache had a different kind of strength. It was a strength born from honor, from respect, and from the unbreakable bonds they shared with each other and the earth. Jack knew that he couldn't stay in the camp forever. He had made his choice when he had stepped into the desert to face the test. Now, he had to face the world outside the camp, a world that might not be as kind or understanding as the Apache had been. He wasn't sure what awaited him, but he knew one thing: the respect he had earned from the Apache came with a price. The next morning, as the sun began to rise, the leader called Jack to him. The other warriors were busy preparing for the day, but the leader's presence seemed to command all attention. "You have learned much," the leader said, his voice calm, but with an undertone of something deeper, something Jack couldn't quite grasp. "But now you must leave this place. The time for lessons has passed. Your path lies beyond these mountains." Jack nodded, unsure of what he was meant to do. The leader's eyes softened, just for a moment, as if acknowledging the bond that had formed between them. "You have earned our respect, but it is not enough," he continued. "Your true challenge awaits in the world you left behind. There you will face the trials that will define you. If you succeed, you will carry the honor of the Apache with you. If you fail, you will have lost more than just the respect of our people." Jack felt a lump form in his throat, the weight of the leader's words pressing down on him. He had come so far, but now he understood. The journey was not just about surviving the desert, or earning the respect of the Apache. It was about something much larger. It was about living a life of honor, a life that aligned with the values he had learned here in the desert. The leader's voice cut through his thoughts, steady and unyielding. "Go now. The world awaits, and you must face it with strength, with wisdom, and with the courage that you have shown us. If you do, you will not walk alone." Jack swallowed hard and nodded once more, the weight of his decision settling on him like the heat of the desert sun. He turned and began to walk toward his horse, the sound of his boots crunching softly in the sand. As he mounted his horse, he looked back at the camp, at the warriors who had become more than just strangers to him. They had become a part of his journey, a part of his story. With one final glance, he spurred his horse forward, into the unknown. The sun was high now, and the desert stretched out before him, endless and vast. Jack's heart beat with a newfound purpose, a sense of clarity he had never known before. He was not just a cowboy from the plains anymore. He was something more. The world beyond the desert awaited him, and with each mile he traveled, he would carry the lessons of the Apache with him, the respect they had shown him, and the honor he had earned. The true test was just beginning. Jack Monroe rode through the vast expanse of the desert, the wind whispering through the barren landscape, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. The sun was high in the sky now, its heat pressing down on him like an unyielding weight. Yet, despite the burning rays, there was a sense of calm within him, a clarity he hadn't felt in years. The Apache leader's words echoed in his mind as he rode, each syllable a reminder of the journey he had embarked on and the path that lay ahead. The world he had known, the simple life of a cowboy, seemed far behind him now. He had crossed into a new chapter, one that held unknown challenges and responsibilities. Jack's heart raced with anticipation, but there was also an underlying sense of fear. Fear of failure. Fear of the unknown. But there was also something else, something stronger than fear. It was a quiet, unwavering determination. He had proven himself in the desert, but the true test had yet to come. As the hours passed, Jack's thoughts drifted back to the Apache camp, to the warriors who had watched him, measured him, and ultimately accepted him into their world. He had earned their respect, but that respect was not freely given. It was earned through perseverance, honor, and the willingness to face the harshest of trials. Now, he had to return to the world he had left behind and carry with him the lessons he had learned from the Apache people. Jack knew that life in the outside world was different. It wasn't the vast, open desert where one could lose oneself in the silence and the endless horizon. It was a place filled with noise, with expectations, with people who would never understand the bond he had formed with the Apache. And yet, he was ready. He had no choice but to face what awaited him. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the desert floor. Jack's journey had taken him deep into the heart of the wilderness, and now, as the day turned to night, he felt the weight of the world bearing down on him. But there was no turning back. He had made his choice. He had made his way through the desert, proven his worth, and earned the trust of the Apache. And now, he had to take those lessons and apply them to the life that awaited him. As the stars began to twinkle above, Jack knew that the true test of his character would come not from the challenges of the desert, but from the challenges of the world he had left behind. It was a world filled with people who didn't understand the bonds of honor, respect, and survival that the Apache held dear. But Jack Monroe was no longer just a cowboy. He was a man who had learned the strength of the land, the power of the spirit, and the importance of living with integrity. He was a man who had earned his place in a world that was not his own, and now, he would return to the world that had always been his, carrying with him the lessons of the Apache, the strength of the desert, and the unwavering belief that honor, once earned, was a bond that could never be broken. As he rode on into the night, Jack felt a sense of peace settle over him. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he was ready to face whatever came next. The desert had tested him, the Apache had judged him, and now, the world awaited him. Jack Monroe was ready to live the life he had earned, a life of honor, courage, and respect.